Welcome. My name is Steve Bentley. I'm with the Calgary Climate Hub, and this is your Climate Lens coverage of the COP29 Global Climate Conference in the city of Baku in the petrostate of Azerbaijan. As you may recall from our coverage from previous years, these COP events are met with complicated mixtures of hope and heavy cynicism. And I think it's fair to say the hope side was just dealt a supremely heavy blow this week as the whole world watched a particular election in a particular country of a particular man, and everyone in the world knows exactly what I'm talking about here. That amongst a great many other things will doom that critical country's critical climate work for at least the foreseeable future and will wreak havoc with the entire world's climate action writ large. Under that shadow, with me today again is Dr. Joe Vipond, who will be traveling to Baku to once again bear witness to this conference and report back to us the ongoings, the wins, the losses, and specifically to call out the copious amounts of greenwashing and disinformation as he sees them with daily reports we've taken to calling Debunktion Junction. They might not be daily. We'll see how everything works. It's a dirty job, but the doctor and myself do indeed believe somebody has to do it. Dr. Joe, welcome once again to our COP coverage.
Well, I want to say it's exciting to be here, but it's kind of more trepidatious, but it's got to be done,
Mm,
right? Like the work doesn't stop just because we hit bumps in the road, and there's always going to be bumps.
that's right. I guess we addressed the elephant in the room. There was that election. I myself find myself unable to even mention the name of the country or the name of the person that won.
Painful.
I'm not telling you what to do, but that's what I'm doing. But I guess just before we get into the cop stuff, I just want to get your immediate reaction to what went down.
Well, I do think in a lot of ways, even though climate wasn't mentioned, similar to the Alberta election, which we had
Hmm.
2 years ago, climate was all over this, right? Like the gentleman in question is supported by the country of Russia, which is a petrostate. Um, there was a specific pledge of $1 billion from oil and gas companies to his campaign so that they could do whatever they want. Drill, baby, drill was an official campaign slogan.
Hmm.
So this was a climate election. So if we are facing an existential crisis that is worsening by the day, how could this possibly have happened? Um, I think we can't discount the amount of fear that people are feeling. If you're in North Carolina and you've just been devastated by a climate related hurricane, how could you possibly vote for somebody who has pledged to make that worse? And the answer is, well, you're just scared, right? And easy solutions generally are more palatable than real solutions. And he's offering magic. And you
Yeah.
unfortunately, humans are flawed and may view magic as a more palatable solution than hard work. Um, so the counter to all this is, have you been watching what's been happening in China? Like China is an authoritarian state. It's the United States is quickly moving that way, but China's an authoritarian state that is fully bought into the energy transition. So a lot of the innovation is coming out of there. There's credible information that says they may have reached peak emissions this year. And let's be clear that the U.S. reached peak emissions years ago because they have, been decreasing their coal-fired emissions, and so they actually have been dropping much better than Canada has been. I might point out, like
Hmm.
much faster. Um, but if the energy transition is inevitable, it's not super smart to double down on the losing side, which I would argue is what is about to happen in the United States, and therefore isn't going to work out well for the United States. So I feel like I'm rambling a little bit here, but I'm trying to crystallize some of the thinking that's going on in my mind. Um, if you have a choice between 2 cents a kilowatt hour solar panels, and then maybe add another 3 cents a kilowatt hour for storage. I don't know the exact numbers. And you have to choose between that and um, like a 7 cent or 8 cent an hour natural gas plant with variable input costs. People are going to make an economic choice, no matter what the preferred choice is of those in power. And because solar panels continue to plummet in price, because battery costs continue to plummet in price, because electrification does seem to be uh, a better way of making a car, a better way of heating a house, um, it is going to inevitably win. And I think the fear that you and I have, if I may put some words in
You
your
know where I'm coming from, Joe. You know
is
where I'm coming.
speed.
Yeah.
We're gonna win, but winning, the speed of winning is really
Yeah.
important because we're from a physical side, from an environment, from like the physical sciences, we're losing.
Yeah, and then I guess the other question before we move more into the conference talk is just that you might not have an answer immediately for this, but what should Canada do given that our neighbor is about to plummet into, amongst a great many other things, heavy climate denial and the kind of pushback against climate solutions that we're seeing here in Alberta? Are there things that are there advantages or opportunities for Canada maybe we can look to? One of the things that I was thinking about the other day was just that, hey, listen, there's an emerging uh, global energy transition economy that is coalescing here, and it, in the North American marketplace, the biggest player is going to sit it out. So, are there opportunities for Canada in the midst of this? Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. When I think about what's happening in Canada the next year, I think election.
Yeah.
I think about the fact that elections matter. I feel like because of the media landscape being kind of evaporated, and I think that contributed to what's going on in the United States, and is maybe what
Yep.
it's contributing to what's going on here in Canada. Our political parties better figure themselves out quickly.
Yeah.
I'm not a political scientist, so I'm not going to tell each party what to do. But I can tell you that we as citizens need to engage in our political process and make sure that climate is on the agenda and that people are aware that their choices matter. And that trying to create policy that isn't science based, no civilization has ever done well denying reality. None.
Right.
So it may feel comfortable to just go, nah, 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 nah. I'm not listening to all the alarm bells that are sounding off around us about climate. It's not going to serve us well in the long run. And we profess as humans to have foresight and be able to make wise decisions. Now's the time we need to show the world that we can do that. And I understand that there's personalities and politics, and that politics is a messy space. But at the end of the day, we need to figure this out because my kids, the next generation, deserve safety. And I feel like we're stealing that from them for short-term gains. And just keep remembering the next generation, Steve. I don't have to tell you
Yep.
that. You say that every time at the beginning of all shows. So
Hmm. Yeah. So, segueing into the conference lightly, I guess you'd say is that I think one of the things that we're all going to end up tracking as we're paying attention to this thing is how did that election impact this conference? Do you have at the outset? Do you have an idea about what are the ramifications for what happened 2 days ago or yesterday or whenever the hell it was, and this global climate conference?
yeah, well, my understanding is the American system doesn't change over until late
Correct.
January. So
Yeah.
it'll still be the Biden administration that will be attending this iteration of COP. Whether they feel they have the mandate to do negotiations, I don't know. When you go to a conference like COP. There's a lot of stuff going on. The negotiations are the um, real reason why people go. Although I do not personally go to the negotiations, I find them painful and dry, and I don't have a lot to add to those negotiations. So I will not be sitting in those rooms trying to figure that out. I will be working on the side, going speaking at events, going to events, trying to ensure that the media is accessing information that is based in science rather than based in corporate ideology, and that's my purpose for going.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. And then so this year we're in Baku, we're in Azerbaijan. We know that that country is already one of the world's largest exporters of fossil fuels, and it plans to increase gas production by a third by 2030. So it was very reminiscent of the previous year when we were in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, avowed petrostates with petro champions everywhere. Do you feel do you feel like there's any reason to expect better or worse outcomes than the previous COP or COPs?
Well, I don't think it's accidental that the last three COPs have been in three authoritarian states, two which are
Yeah,
prominent petrostates. I do think there is an effort to derail the work of climate. We managed to get language related to transition off fossil fuels into the text, the final text last year. But there were no specifics on that. And my understanding is that those kind of phrasings have been dropped in negotiations going forward into this time. Um, and why does it matter? It matters because this is a fossil fuel emergency. Like we call it the climate crisis or the climate emergency, but it's a fossil fuel emergency. Like they're related. So
yeah,
it'd be like saying, I want to deal with the water dripping in my kitchen without dealing with the tap upstairs that's running. Like if I ignore the fundamental problem, I'm not going to be able to solve that. And so I think it behooves us in civil society to keep ensuring that the media, the citizens understand the interrelated nature of that, the fundamental problem. And I do feel that as a president in a COP, you have a lot of power in framing the text and in ensuring like your identity gets interwoven within the process. And so it's going to be hard in Azerbaijan. They are explicitly wanting to increase their fossil fuel use, as you mentioned. And let's be clear, every petrostate has that intention.
sure.
Alberta has explicitly stated that. I think they said they want to double our
Yeah,
oil and gas output. Saskatchewan, similarly, the United States has similar intentions. Like, there's no country that produces oil and gas that is saying, "Yeah, we're okay with dialing things back." Now, there is economics as well. Like, if every country doubles their export while fossil fuel use is going down, thanks to um, technology and good choices, then what that means is very, very low prices, and then everybody's who's get rich quick schemes are coming out of petrostates is failing. Um, but nobody can predict the future, so it's very, I don't know. In my mind, it seems unwise to be doubling down on fossil fuels at a time of energy transition from an economic perspective, but it's very much bad idea from a climate perspective.
right. So I know in the previous years, I mean, in last year, Alberta rather infamously sent a delegation to promote oil and gas at this climate conference. I think it was last year. And I think you're able to ask the premier question and stuff like that. And certainly there was quite a lot of like an enormous team of oil and gas lobbyists that go out to that. Is there any reason to expect anything different? I know that I haven't heard anything about Alberta sending a delegation this year, but I don't know if you've heard differently or not. But
Yeah,
it,
so for the first time last year, the Canadian oil and gas community had a pavilion at Dubai. It was called the Clean Resource Innovation Network, CRIN. You'll notice that there's no mention of the word Canadian or oil and gas in their acronym, but it is
Mhm.
explicitly a fossil fuel based Canadian effort, and that's predominantly where the Alberta delegation was speaking at. So when you have a pavilion, you basically have a space to network and also to host events. So CRIN is back. This will be year two. They're quite excited to say I think they've doubled their physical space. They're going to be back better than ever. I know that on the 13th of November, which is the third day of COP, Rebecca Schultz, our environment minister, will be there speaking at 3 events that morning. And then there are events peppered throughout the rest of the weeks as well. Um, I don't know of anybody other than Rebecca Schultz going from the Alberta government, but presumably, the CRIN Pavilion is going to be big. It's going to be well attended by the oil and gas community, and it's going to need to be a center for some of the pushback by Canadian civil society, because they're there for a reason. They're there, I'm sure, to do some networking as well, but also to push the agenda that the solution for Alberta is carbon capture and storage, and to push back on the emissions cap. And it'll be interesting to see how they weave that narrative, because it wasn't that long ago, 4 years ago, that the oil and gas companies and Alberta government were saying they were going to be net zero by 2050, without any plan to real get there, no interim targets, and
Mhm.
so I think you will have noticed a change in the narrative from most of the oil and gas companies, including Suncor, including the Pathways Alliance, including the Alberta government, saying that we can't have a cap on emissions. Having a 2050 target in 2024 with no plan to get there is essentially useless. You need to have
Mhm.
policy, and the one policy that would seem a easy first step, which is an oil and gas emissions, they're cap. They're pushing back on vehemently. So I'm hoping to engage in some discussions there, because yeah, the double down on status quo is pretty scary.
And how much do you figure this is going to be a carbon capture dog and pony show? I mean, the one solution that all the oil companies like and all the petrostates like. It buys them time to continue doing exactly what they're doing. It's not something that we're seeing work on anywhere close to a scale that's going to make a difference on climate change between now and 2050 or beyond. Do you feel like this conference is basically a big car show for carbon capture, or are there other expectations you have?
I'll report back.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that the enthusiasm for carbon capture and storage is waning in the
Yeah.
industry. There has not been any projects the size of what's proposed in the oil sands that has been successful. There's a lot of many smaller projects that, for the most part, have, um, I wouldn't say, been unremitting successes. We talk about the Quest project by Shell in central Alberta as being a success. It only captures, I think, something like 55% of the emissions that come out of that plant. They told me by design, but that's still not reassuring. Like, you've designed for
Right.
it to perform poorly, and it's meeting that target isn't reassuring when the objective is 95% of emissions removal. You can see this in the pushback on the clean energy um, regulations on electricity, that they say they can't meet the stringent targets being set out by government on a relatively clean smokestack emissions of natural gas. So there's waning enthusiasm about that. I know that Capital Power and ENMAX have recently canceled their plans for carbon capture and storage in Alberta at the Shepherd plant. I can tell you that the Pathways Alliance proposal for that massive project, they want to be predominantly funded by the federal government. They don't want to be putting
Sure.
oil and gas money into that. They say for two reasons. First of all, they can't monetize the plant, and that's because removing CO2 from their gases has no monetary, they can't produce money that way, which is because CO2 removal is not monetized essentially.
It's only a cost to them. It
It's
does
only a
not
cost to them.
does not create value for them.
And they also say that they need federal government money because they want to de-risk the project, which suggests to me that they see risks that this might not even work, right?
Right.
So those are that's a big deal. And then of course the other issue that's kind of the elephant in the room is that even if they were to get a fully functional plant working great up there, it's only a certain percentage of the oil sands emissions and only 20% of the total emissions emitted by the oil produced from the oil sands, because the rest is burned in tailpipes and at facilities away from that area. So yeah, it's a struggle. So
Okay.
they may try and turn it into a CCS show, but I think there's a lot of waning enthusiasm for this, and I think that's the recognition is we need to transition off of these fuels, not try and pull it out as long as possible without acting. It's a
So
sobering issue for us in Calgary, right? Because we are
for sure.
so tied identity wise to this as being our who we are. We are Albertans. We are oil and gas, and but yet we're destroying the world. It's pretty scary. I don't know if you struggle with that, Steve, but I do struggle
Yeah.
with that.
So as far if the answer is nothing and not at all, then feel free to say that. But I guess what's your best grounded hope for this conference?
Well, I go because I don't see an alternative. Like I want to
Mhm.
be in the room trying to make things better. Every time I look at my 16-year-old and my 18-year-old and I think of the future that befalls them, I'm like, well, I'm going to do every friggin' thing I can to try and make their world safer.
Mhm.
So I don't know what's going to happen over the next 10 days. I know some cops, I think there's a lot of pessimism going into this COP based on its location, based on the state of the world today. Um, but I think now more than ever,
We got to
those
try.
of us who care, we got to try, right? So I'm not going to curl up in a fetal position in my basement, avoiding this for too long. Um, I'm on a
Mhm.
plane on Sunday, so
Okay, so my final question for you, and something I want you to keep an eye out in Azerbaijan, in Baku, for is to me, this is a manifestly broken process. These COP conferences, you have three authoritarian petrostates in a row now, and for Baku, that was a universal, or not a universal. That was there was a unanimous decision to pick Baku. And to me, that reads, and I think it's irrefutable that this is a very much an extremely broken process. That this is how the only substantial, important, great, big global climate conferences are chosen and how they're operating. And so, I guess the question that I have is, or the thing I'd like you to keep an eye out for, is people who are on the ground there talking about how to fix this, not just fix the climate problem, fix this conference that's supposed to be fixing the climate problem. Do you have a do you hear anything on the ground about efforts towards this?
yeah, so the way it was chosen is that it rotates through different locations, and I think there's 5 locations, and one of them is Central Europe. And the reason why it ended up in Azerbaijan is because all the other options were vetoed by Russia, who has a veto on this. And it was because of their support for the Ukrainian people during their
Russia.
yeah. So it all comes back to Russia again,
Yeah.
um, and um, and so that's how it ended up in Baku. And yeah, I mean, it's above my pay grade to fix the entire climate negotiations process, but I will keep an ear out for people who are thoughtfully trying to push for better ways. Client,
Dr. Joe,
um, what do you call it? Group problems, uh, tragedy of the commons, are difficult problems. That's
yeah.
why we're in the place we're in today. But there are
Well,
200
Dr.
countries in the world, and not all of them are petrostates, and not all of them are authoritarians. So we have a lot of people who care about this.
Dr. Joe, we want you to be safe out there, and appreciate the work that you always do, and you end up inspiring everybody around you, and just again, be safe and keep up the good work.
Just remember, it's all about love.
I can dig that.